Thank you, Andy. Ooh, a little loud there. I'm not a geologist, I'm a geographer, and I'm actually a human geographer, more archaeology, anthropology, history than the physical side of things. I got my bachelor's degree from Western Reserve University, now Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland. My master's is from Michigan State, and my PhD is from UCLA. As Andy said, I was at Fresno State for 41 years. I did manage to spend some of that time in Peru. I've actually lived in Peru for about a total of 8 years, 4 different times for a year or more. I taught at the Catholic University and ran a cultural exchange program 2 different times in the 1980s. I've also spent a lot of time in Mexico. We used to have a house in Puerto Vallarta, and I used to take students on field trips to Mexico every spring vacation in the 70s and early 80s to Baja California. So Ensenada, I remember back from the 1968 and 69. It's changed a little bit. And then I've gone farther south. One time we drove university vehicles. They thought we were going across the border into Mexico, and we got within 50 miles of the Guatemala border. They were not a little happy with that. Today's lecture is going to be at the tip of the peninsula. We're going to talk about the Baja California Peninsula as well as the Cabo San Lucas area. I'm going to apologize for something right away. Every ship that I get on, we have to figure out how things are going to work. And we were checking before you came in, the bottom, 1/10 of my screen, as I'm seeing it on my computer, is not on that screen there. So hopefully there isn't going to be much that we miss. And by the time I get to the second lecture, I'll have just my computer so I know how it's going to fit on here. The star there obviously is Cabo San Lucas area, the far southern tip of Baja California. And I'm going to start out here with a little bit of geology. I'm not a geologist. I'm in way over my head as I talk about this, but there's our Baja Peninsula from outer space. And there's where we're missing something. We're missing just that bottom 10th or so of the slide. The area of Baja California and literally all of the west coast of Mexico and the United States and Central America and South America is all part of what we call the Ring of Fire. All the way around the Pacific is this area of earthquake activity and volcanic activity, and Baja is typical of that. What's happening here is that the Pacific plate, which is underneath the Pacific Ocean mainly, excuse me, in this area is moving northward relative to the mainland, the North American plate. And Baja California is basically moving to the north. If any of you are from California and you cannot afford a seaside villa, what I would suggest is go down to Baja California and buy some seaside property. And all you have to do is wait about 8 or 10 million years and you will have California seaside property. It's going to happen. But there's the North American plate and the Pacific plate. Right off the tip of Baja California is an area that is known as the Alarcon Rise. And that is a spreading point, and that's what's pushing Baja California northward. This one little strip of the Pacific plate that is being pushed to the north with that rise, that spreading there. There again is showing the Alarcon Rise. It's in the general area off the southern tip of Baja California. Along that divide between the Pacific plate and the North American plate, there are frequently earthquakes. This is one that was in the area of Mexicali, just east of Tijuana, northeast of Ensenada in April of 2010, fairly strong one, and there was another strong one in October of 2010, just to the east of the southern tip of Baja California. They are now overdue for another big one. In fact, yesterday when I was walking around, I was talking with a fellow, I met him, somebody I was expecting to meet, and ran into him, and He works in the fire department and also the Red Cross, and they are really prepared now. Baja California used to be really unprepared, but in the last few years they have improved their systems, and they are now ready for a pretty big earthquake, which they expect. They're literally overdue for it, as is Southern California. Now, as I mentioned, I'm not a geologist, so I'm going to show a little video here.
In the Gulf of California, continuing in a fairly linear trend southeastward from the state of California. Stepping back, we see that these earthquakes define the southwestern margin of the North American plate between California and Middle America. Here, we'll focus on the Gulf of California rift zone, a divergent margin which is propagating into California. It is a transitional corridor that connects the East Pacific Rise spreading ridge to the south with the San Andreas Fault Zone in California. Extension and strike-slip faulting are causing Baja California to separate away from mainland Mexico, thereby opening the Gulf of California as though it were being unzipped. In reality, the waters of the Gulf of California hide connecting stair-stepping seafloor spreading ridges with right lateral strike-slip motion on classic transform faults. This collection of faults and ridges forms a continental rift system that is tearing the Pacific plate apart from the North American plate. If we zoom in, we can see the processes occurring. As the lithospheric plates move apart, heat rises beneath the mid-ocean ridge. Magma forms at shallow pressures and creates new rock at the spreading ridges. The plates move away in conveyor belt-like fashion. Movement between the ridges is accommodated by transform faults where large earthquakes occur due to friction between the plates. Smaller earthquakes also occur along the ridges. Backing out to map view, we see the simplified San Andreas fault system cutting through California. As the movement of the plates continues along this plate boundary, it is forcing Baja California away from Mexico and causing Santa Barbara and San Diego to migrate northward towards San Francisco. Zooming into this smaller region for a more detailed look, we will go back 20 million years to watch how the Gulf and coastal areas developed. This animation by Tanya Atwater shows a tectonic model for the 20 million year evolution of the region, depicting the rotation of the transverse range blocks, the breakup of the continental shelf, as well as the opening of the Gulf of California as the Pacific plate grinds northward against the North American plate. The Baja California Peninsula and most of southwestern California is a remnant of the North American continent that was sheared off and moved to its present position. Earthquakes in the Gulf are more of a nuisance than a threat. However, the on-land part of this spreading ridge extends into Baja California, Mexico, and the Imperial Valley of California, where it is transitioning from ridge transform boundary to the continental boundary. This area is especially vulnerable because it's underlain by soft sediment that can shake violently during earthquakes. Scientifically, the Gulf is a classic place to study the early stages of the opening of an ocean basin.
I found that video on YouTube, and I really like it. It explains it so much better than I could possibly explain it in, 3 minutes. I'll talk very briefly about climate. We're interested, what's the weather going to be like tomorrow? Well, in general, the high temperature in October is about 94 degrees. So we may have a warm day. The low is only about 70, and the average rainfall is about 3 inches. But that's a total false impression there. The average for Cabo area is less than 9 inches per year. But what happens is that many years they will get virtually no rain, and then in 1 year they will get 15 inches or 20 inches when they have a hurricane. The hurricane season is there's the sea temperature. The hurricanes are basically August, September, October. And if they get a hurricane that hits Cabo, they might get 20 inches of rain. Now, you may be thinking, hopefully they haven't had a hurricane recently. Unfortunately, you're wrong. 2 weeks ago, Cabo was hit by a pretty good hurricane. That map, excuse me, see if it'll back off here. That was basically saying in Spanish, we must be prepared. The prediction, this was from literally 2 weeks ago. On Wednesday, Thursday, it's showing where it was going to be Thursday 2 weeks ago, and then Friday and so forth from 10 days ago. This is where it was on Friday 2 weeks ago. And then, unfortunately, they were wrong, or fortunately, they were wrong. It was going to look, they were predicting that it was going to go up the west coast of Baja and get into Southern California. That way, it changed path, and this is, I think, on about Saturday or Sunday when it had crossed over Cabo and was heading for the mainland of Mexico. And this was from, I think, the Sunday, week and a half ago, when it was over the Gulf and heading into Mexico. It did bring a lot of rain into Arizona and then ultimately got into the mainland part of Mexico. That's a picture that I found on the web from Cabo San Lucas a week and a half ago. And that was from a week and a half ago in Cabo. And this was from just outside of Cabo. So they did get their October rain or September rain 2 weeks ago. There was a storm off the coast of Mexico down a little past Puerto Vallarta a few days ago, and I have not heard what has happened to that storm, whether it dissipated, whether it turned west across the Pacific, or what. Hopefully we will not run into it. On a normal year, Baja doesn't get much rain. It is a desert. It's an interesting desert. It's got a lot of different plants that are not in many of the other deserts, including some that are called like boojum trees. These are the cardone cactus there on the right. There's cactus and ones like that, this elephant tree and boojum trees, so forth. It is a desert. Most of you probably will not see much of the desert, depending on what kind of a tour you're doing. If you're doing one of the ones, I think the four-wheel drive or the off-roaders may get a little bit out into the desert. This picture is from just to the north of Cabo. This is about 10 miles to the north. The ship was fairly close to the water. I was able to get a picture, telephoto shot. I'll talk a bit about the native populations, the indigenous populations of Baja. I use this map when I do lectures on the archaeology of southern South America. It shows that we think that there were probably about 4 different migrations of humans into the Western Hemisphere. The earliest was at least 14,000 years ago, and we now think that it was probably more, at least 20,000 years ago. Some people are pushing it back to 30,000 years ago or even earlier than that. But those earliest people that got into the Western Hemisphere ended up occupying only the far southern tip of South America, the yellow that you see there, bottom of the map. They were literally pushed down there by people that were more sophisticated in culture, had better technologies that pushed them into what was essentially a bad area. You might also notice that there is yellow in Baja California. And again, what happened was that more sophisticated people pushed these people that had lesser technology into the far southern part of Baja California. The second migration was on the order of about 13 or 12,000 years ago. It's the pink that's most of South America and most of North America. There was a third migration roughly 8,000 years ago. It's the darker red on this map. And that's the Navajo, the Apache, the Na-Dene people. They're in the Western Canada. And then the most recent migration, 4,000 to 6,000 years ago, are the Aleut and the Eskimos that are in the far Arctic. And those people literally occupied the Arctic from northern Sweden and Lapland and Finland and so forth, northern Russia, all the way across the Arctic area to Greenland. At the time of European contact in Baja California, there were basically 3 different culture groups in Baja. In the far north, there were a series of groups or tribes that were hunters and collectors. They went after the wild animals. They collected pinyon nuts and acorns and things of that nature. But they also did have agriculture, especially around the Colorado River Delta, the area of Mexicali today. There's a second group kind of in the middle of Baja, the Guaycura. They did not have agriculture. They're in a drier area. Agriculture was not really possible. They did use the bow and arrow. They had a pretty good technology for hunting. And in the far south, there's a group of people called the Piriku who did not have the bow and arrow. That is to say, those are the remnant people. The Piriku are the remnants of that very, very earliest migration, the people with the least amount of technology. Again, the far south is cut off on this map. I will adjust for my next lecture. We'll adjust to make sure that my computer is reading right to the system here. But what's in the red there at the far bottom right corner on this map, that's the Piriku area. I first had contact with some of the native peoples, indigenous peoples in Baja in 1968. I visited a former mission, a little settlement called Santa Catarina, southeast of Ensenada, one of the first times that I was in Baja. And at the time that I was there in 1968, this was a very typical house in Santa Catarina. That's 68 picture. This is from about 1972 or 1973. Same sort of house, but now they had a little bit of wood on one of the walls. This picture was from the late 70s. By that time, they had built a house out of concrete and fired brick. This is the same family that we're seeing here. And the woman in the house, the mother was Maria. This is from about 1974 or 1975 with one of her daughters. And here's a 1988 picture with two of the daughters, one of the same ones that was in the last picture. That was the last time I visited that particular family. Europeans arrived in this area very early. If you know your Mexican history, Cortez began the conquest of Mexico, conquest of the Aztecs in 1518. And at about that same time, there was a book that was published in Spain in 1521, but clearly it was written a few years before that. So it was written before the Spanish had really any knowledge of Mexico. And in that book, it described an island off the west coast of America that was governed by a queen, Queen Khalifa. And Queen Khalifa, her island, her territory, obviously got its name from her. It was called California. So there was this early map with showing this island off the coast of Mexico, of western Mexico. Early on, Cortez wanted to make contact with Queen Khalifa and California. So within a decade or so of the conquest of the Aztecs, he organized an expedition, sent out ships to explore and try to find that island. They didn't find it. You have to remember what's going on here. This is just a decade or so after the conquest that they have gotten down to the Pacific coast. They have built ships and they have gone exploring along the Pacific side. That's within a decade or so. If you also think in terms of the same thing in another area that we're going to, in Panama, it was just about a decade or so after the Spanish set up settlements on the Pacific side of Panama that Pizarro began to explore along the coast of South America. So just within a decade or so of those first explorations, they had ships that they were able to sail along the Pacific. They didn't find anything. Cortez then organized a second expedition in 1535 that he led, and they did touch in Baja California, apparently near what is today the city of La Paz. La Paz is the capital of the state of southern Baja. Baja California Sur is La Paz is the capital. He sent out another expedition. They sailed along the entire length of the Sea of Cortez or the Gulf of California, determined that it wasn't an island, it was a peninsula. And then another expedition in 1542 sailed around Cabo San Lucas, sailed up the west coast, and reached to probably modern San Diego. If you're again from the San Diego area, you know the name Cabrillo as Point Cabrillo, and that's about where the Spanish got in that expedition. They then ceased doing any exploring, any work at all in this area for at least 50 years. So no Spanish did anything. In my next lecture, I'll be talking about the area around Acapulco, the area inland, the Zapotecs and Oaxaca, but also around the city. And there's a very nice museum close to the cruise terminal. If you're not doing anything, it's one that's easy to walk to, and I'll point that out in the next lecture. By the late 1500s, the Spanish were sending ships from Mexico all the way across the Pacific to Manila, comes known as the Manila Galleons. When those ships would sail back east across the Pacific, what they would do is simply sail along until they bumped into North America, and they knew you bump into North America, you turn right, and you eventually reach Acapulco, just like we're sailing along now. So there were Spanish ships sailing in the late 1500s, early 1600s along the coast of Baja California, but no attempts at settlement, no attempts to occupy it at all. The governor of Sinaloa, one of the states of western Mexico, did send an expedition in 1683 to try to settle Baja. The local Indians resisted, and that was a failure. A couple of years later, a Jesuit priest arrived in the area of La Paz or Loreto, the east side of the peninsula, and established the first mission at Loreto. The mother mission for the Jesuits in Baja was at Loreto, established in 1697. There's a drawing of the mission, started in 1740 and finished in 1744. It still exists. There's my photo of the Loreto mission, and there's a more recent one. The Jesuits founded a whole series of missions. They were roughly a day's travel apart. The problem was that in Baja there wasn't a lot of water, so sometimes they had to be farther apart than that. But they located the missions wherever there were both water and local Indians that could be converted. That's at Mulahay, another of the Jesuit missions. This is San Ignacio, obviously named for St. Ignatius, the founder of the Jesuits. This one is San Francisco Borja, founded in 1762. It was still a Jesuit mission. There's San Francisco Borja. This is San Fernando Villicata, founded in 1769. Again, this is a photo that I took in 1968, one of the first times I was in this area. San Fernando Villicata is about 60 or 70 miles south of Ensenada. Just about 2 days travel in those days south of Ensenada. And there's the sign for San Fernando Villicata. Notice that it was founded by Junipero Serra, now Saint Junipero Serra. He's been canonized. He's a Franciscan. And notice the date, 1769. The Jesuits were kicked out of the Western Hemisphere in around 1764 or 1765. And it wasn't for anything that they did in Baja California. It was conflicts between the Spanish and the Portuguese in what is today Brazil and Argentina and Paraguay. If you're familiar with the Robert De Niro movie, The Mission, from about 20 years ago, Academy Award winner, that movie relates the conflicts of the Jesuits and the Spanish and the Portuguese in those days. But the Jesuits got kicked out, so the Franciscans took over and ultimately established a whole series of missions farther north, northern Baja, the Ensenada area, the Tijuana area, San Diego, and all the way up past San Francisco. There's San Fernando Villicata, which is pretty much in ruins. Now, This again is one of the Jesuit missions, not one of the Franciscan ones. We've shifted gears and moved to the south. I was showing you ones that were working their way to the north from Loreto. This one is south of Loreto, San Jose del Cabo. The mission at San Jose still exists, or at least the church still exists. These are pictures from 1910, and there's one from about 4 years ago, or from about 2 years ago, or from earlier this year. The church has been remodeled. It is not the exact same church that was there originally. They've rebuilt it a couple times because of earthquakes and also hurricanes. If you go to San Jose del Cabo, if you're on one of the tours that goes to San Jose del Cabo, you can see this church. You can usually go inside, and you can look out on the plaza. This picture is from, I think, 3 years ago. It will not look exactly like this. A hurricane 2 years ago totally wiped out this part of San Jose del Cabo. They have rebuilt the area. The plaza looks good, but you will not see nice big trees like you see here. They haven't gotten that big again. The whole area downtown was wiped out. There's the bandstand. This one has been repaired. It looks pretty much like that today. If you're on a tour that goes to San Jose del Cabo, I think there are 2 or 3 different tours. One is just a walking tour, do it on your own or something like that. You'll get off the bus about a block from the main plaza, and then you can walk around. They usually give you about an hour or so to walk around. And it's an interesting little town. It's not as touristy as Cabo San Lucas. Cabo San Lucas is pretty much a tourist area like we saw in Ensenada. But this is downtown San Jose del Cabo. This is one of the side streets there. When I was here in May, the tour that I was escorting or working with was the art tour. And I know the art tour is one of the ones that is being offered this time. And we went to about 6 or 7 galleries. We spent a couple of hours touring the galleries. We stopped at a local brewery and had something to drink. And there are several different kinds. Some are pretty much modern art. Some are local indigenous art. One of the things, if you do that tour, you'll see signs that say, do not take any photographs in the galleries. And the guide I was with had special permission, so I'm not violating any rules when I took this picture. But this was one of the indigenous art galleries. That was one that was modern sculpture. And this again is one from indigenous art. One of the galleries had a fellow that was actually doing art. They bring in rotating local indigenous artists. This guy is not from Baja California. He's from over on the mainland adjacent area. He's a native Huichol Indian. And the Huichol are famous for taking objects, things like a wooden sculpture or a cow's skull or any kind of thing, sometimes just a piece of wood, coating it with wax, and then pressing colored beads into that and making objects that are decorated with the colored beads. And very, very nice. If you've ever been over by Puerto Vallarta or Mazatlan, you probably have also seen this. The Huichol are really in the interior area between Mazatlan and Puerto Vallarta. But he was making a little, I think it was a deer sculpture that he was doing there. In the background you can see one that's of a jaguar or something with the typical Huichol decorations. For Cabo San Lucas, the area where we will be visiting tomorrow, there are reports that somebody was living there, probably pirates, in the late 1700s, early 1800s, but there's not much evidence for anybody living there until really the late 1800s or very early 1900s. The first really good information we have is the establishment of a tuna canning factory in 1917. We will be anchored in a bay. This is a tender port, so we will be anchored in this bay. You can see a cruise ship out there. There's another example with a cruise ship in the bay, and then we were tendering in. That point of land beyond the cruise ship is the southernmost point in Baja California. There's the tuning cannery pier with a couple of tuna boats. These photos are from the 1940s and 1950s. Excuse me. This again a picture from 1977. You notice in the background there's literally no development along the beach. And there's the canning plant in the 60s or 70s. You will see this plant is no longer as a tuna canning plant, but you'll see the building. If you're on the tender going into town, it'll be on the left-hand side as we head in, and you will be able to see it very easily. Prior to 1974, there was only a very rough dirt road that connected the northern part of Baja California with Baja California Sur. That road was paved all the way in 1974, and it's the paving, excuse me, it's the paving of that road that opened up southern Baja for tourism. More important than the road, because it's still a long road, it's 1,000 miles, is the airport. There was an airport at La Paz for many, many years, but the airport at Cabo San Lucas was not built until 1986, and it's been reconstructed and extended. It's now the 6th busiest airport in all of Mexico, and there are very easy flights now from Los Angeles or lots of different places you can fly into Cabo. The area that we will be in will be Cabo San Lucas right here at the bottom of the map, and you can see where San Jose del Cabo is located. It's about an hour drive from Cabo San Lucas to San Jose del Cabo. It is a 4-lane divided highway, but it still takes some time. When I was first down here about 10 years ago, there was almost nothing between Cabo San Lucas and San Jose del Cabo. Today, there's developments the entire way. Big condo complexes and big hotel complexes the entire way, world-class golf courses and so forth the entire way. Off of our map, up at the very top, beyond the top of the map, is where La Paz is located. Again, that's the capital of the state of Baja California Sur. This is a satellite view mainly of the Cabo area. You can see this bay that is the area that we will be anchored in. As we come in, if you're up early, before we get there, you will be able to get this particular view. This is from the Pacific side, and those rocks there are the southernmost part of Baja California. There is a very nice beach on that side and condo complexes on the Pacific side. This is aerial view. You can see the bay in the background. And then we will be proceeding around that point with the last few rocks there. There is one spectacular formation that everybody wants to photograph. You're seeing it here, right dead center in the picture. It's called the Arco, or the Arch. There you see it. There's also a nice beach very close to this called Lover's Beach. If you are on your own and not on one of the tours or something, you can go in, you can find little water taxis that will take you out to that beach, and you can have the day out at the beach. The only thing you need to remember if you're doing that is make sure the water taxi knows that you want to be picked up to be taken back to the yacht area where the tender pier is, and that you will get back to the ship, because the last thing we want to do is wave goodbye to you as we go out. The point of land here, we're just cut it off on the bottom there where the arch would be. This is from the Sea of Cortez, or the Gulf of California side. The Pacific is on the other side of those rocks. And there again is the arch, pretty much dead center. Lover's Beach is this area just to the right of that. And again, water taxis will take you out, and then you can walk across and be on the Pacific side. It's one of the nicer beaches in the area. There's a little bit closer view of the arch. Usually you can see seals in this area. A lot of people like to look at the wildlife, and there will usually be seals in the area. There's a little bit closer view. This is from the ship leaving. Again, we will be anchored in the bay there and be going in. You'll see the arch, We'll be going in. I showed you the picture with the tuna factory in 1977 where there was nothing along that beach. Today it's totally built up with condos and hotels. One of the times I was there, I brought my yacht and my helicopter. I always like to tell the story. My wife and I were in an area in mainland Mexico one time, and we were in a resort area, Los Aldas, south of Mazatlan, south of Puerto Vallarta. And we were at this hotel. We woke up the next morning, and there was this yacht parked right off the beach. And I said, you know, what in the world is that? It had a helicopter. It had a sailboat of about 60 or 70 feet on the side, as sort of like the lifeboat. And with a telephoto lens, I was able to read the name of the ship. Then I got on the internet, and it was owned by a fellow by the name of Paul Allen. Anybody know Paul Allen? And this was his smaller ship. His big one was in the Atlantic. His smaller one was on the Pacific side. Paul Allen from Microsoft and Bill Gates and so forth. But we'll be anchored out here. It's a tender port, and we will be taking the tenders in, and the tender dock is right there in the yacht basin. There is a mall near there on the opposite side of the yacht harbor. In terms of distance, this is probably almost a half a mile. So it's about a 15 or 20 minute walk to go over by the mall. Again, this is looking in towards the harbor, which is the yacht basin is there in the center. And here we're on a tender going in. And this is now getting into the yacht basin and then getting off the tender. And that's some of the yachts. There are lots and lots of yachts. Some of them are equipped for deep sea fishing. I think I've talked to a couple people that are headed off deep sea fishing tomorrow. Your boat is probably anchored in here somewhere. I'm not sure that one of the shore excursions from this ship is doing the catamaran. It's one on some of the other ships. They've had the catamaran sail. I know that there is one, it's a fairly large boat. It holds probably 200 or 300 passengers that goes around the arch and gets over on the Pacific side, and you see Lover's Beach from the Pacific side and so forth. I think that's the one that I will be on. This one is called the Yellow Submarine, and it actually does not submerge, but there is a lower area with portholes, and you can get below it and see some of the sea life. Again, I don't think any of the shore excursions tomorrow are showing that one, but if you're on your own, you can find that one. We will be getting off there in the tender dock, and we will be working our way all the way around that if you want to go walking. There are restaurants, there are shops, and so forth all the way around, or at the very top of the map is where the mall is. So this is the sort of thing, if you're walking around the yacht basin, there will be shops and restaurants all the way around. There is a very large aquarium with porpoises. I've never visited that one, but I know some of the people on some of the ships have done that. Or if you walk all the way around the yacht basin, you'll get to this mall. When I was here in, let me think back which trip it was, in May, the mall was being reconstructed. Hopefully it's back open. They were adding space to it and putting in more shops and so forth. But it has all the international shops, that mall. All right, my next talk is going to be on Friday, so 2 days from now. Tomorrow we're in Baja. And what I'm going to be doing is, I'll be talking in the afternoon, I think. Most of my talks are going to be mornings. Friday is going to be one of two that I'll do in the afternoon. Again, there are two of us lecturing, and today he's in the afternoon, I'm in the morning. On Friday he'll be morning, I'll be afternoon, but most of mine will be, I think, morning talks. And what I'm going to be talking about is Oaxaca, the Zapotecs, and Acapulco, setting up our visit to Acapulco on Saturday. Hopefully I'll see you then. Thanks a lot. if you have any questions, I can answer them for a few minutes up here. You want to come up. On many of my lectures, when I'm finishing just on time or just before we have to get out of here, if there is something scheduled in here afterwards, like a dance rehearsal or something, I will go to the back. But today we have a couple minutes. If you have any questions, come on up and talk to me here. Thank you.